introduction. My name is Wauters. I'm the editor of Tech.eu, and I'm very happy to be joined here today by two incredible people. We have Thielová from OneTrust, and we have Schneier, who I think needs no introduction, but is going to get one anyway. He's one of the world's foremost security technologists and also a very prolific author, I would say. And today's topic is ransomware, which I don't know a lot about. What is ransomware? Can anyone explain it to me in simple terms?
You want me to do it? All right. So basically, ransomware is born from two clever enhancements to the criminal business model. The first one is the realization that the only person who values your data is you. So in ransomware, someone breaks into your network, encrypts your data, and then sells it back to you. Right? That's the kidnapping, that's the ransom. Second advancement in the business model is cryptocurrency. Because it's pretty much impossible to engage with a normal financial network if you're a criminal. I mean, try wiring 50,000 euros to Russia and you'll see you can't do it. And suitcases full of 100-euro notes are really, really heavy. So your data is encrypted, held for ransom, you pay with cryptocurrency, you get it back. That's the business model. It's a really good business model. It's global, it scales, and it's very profitable.
Yeah, it's growing like crazy. How are you? You work for a company called OneTrust. What is your perspective on ransomware from your?
Yeah, so I'm responsible for our incident response team response to incident, including ransomware, but I'm looking at it more from the privacy angle as well as the trust angle. So, as we've heard, it's a lot about the idea that some of your data is suddenly not accessible to you and you have to pay back to get it back. But we're trying to think through it also in the sense of all the other compliance and privacy and trust pieces that go into it. So thinking about, okay, suddenly it's personal data or it's healthcare data or it's financial data that's roped into this. How do we deal with it? Do we have to tell someone? If so, how do we work through that problem? How do we make sure that what we're deciding, do we pay, do we not pay, is rooted in some sort of consistency? And how do we potentially address questions from our customers, from our vendors, from the police? And how do we prove that we've done anything we could and did our due diligence at the end of the day to also prevent things? So we're working through this internally, and we're also designing a software platform to help companies navigate those situations and sort of see some sense in it.
Well, thanks for joining, both of you. We now have a better idea what ransomware is. But the title of this session is Ransomware, a New Weapon, which is sort of strange because ransomware in itself isn't new. It's been around almost as long as the web has, right? So how big of a problem?
So ransomware is not new because you couldn't really make it work without cryptocurrency. Right? Before there was Bitcoin, there was no ransomware because you couldn't pay. You couldn't monetize stealing the data.
So crypto really sort of catalyzed
cryptocurrency, crypto's cryptography, let's remember that.
Cryptocurrency.
Right. Cryptocurrency made ransomware possible. So we first started seeing papers about the concept of stealing data, of encrypting data and holding it for ransom. I think late 90s, Moderator wrote the first papers. But it didn't really become a business model until you had a real market in Bitcoin. And it's a robust, it's kind of interesting. If you're a ransomware criminal gang, you actually have a customer service line. In the early years, people didn't know how to get cryptocurrency. So there was a helpline. And you want to make sure that when someone pays, they get their data back because you want to give good customer service. So other victims know if they pay, they'll get their data. So it's a surprisingly legitimate business for being totally illegal because there are trusted ransomware brands. So I mean, you have two ends. You have the very big ransomware. United States Colonial Pipeline made the news recently. I mean, multi-million-dollar ransomware. And you have the 100 pounds, 200 pounds random people. They get their family photos encrypted. And they want to pay the small amount because they can't get their data back any other way. So there really is a full customer service. And this is parameterized. There are different criminals that specialize in different pieces of it. You can get ransomware as a service. You can download and buy ransomware tools. If you actually want to become a criminal, you can do this. It's pretty robust.
Yeah, and they operate like normal software companies. HR department, payments, developers, team leaders. It's kind of strange if you look at it. How big of a problem is it, or has it become today? Are there any like accurate statistics about how problematic
definitely.
it is?
No, there's no accurate data. I mean, most people who pay don't talk about it. We know it makes the news. We can extrapolate. Some of it we got, there was a trove of emails and chats from the Conti ransomware gang that was posted. There are ransomware gangs that were Russian and Ukrainian. Now they're infighting. So we're actually seeing a lot of data because of that, which is kind of interesting.
Yeah.
And it was surprisingly banal. They're complaining about, this ransomware developer is taking too much vacation and this one isn't meeting his milestones. It is. It's a regular company, except they're criminals.
Yeah, regarding the metrics, you're exactly right. It's a bit of a tip of the iceberg kind of situation, but I've seen some statistics around, I think it was the Canadian Cybersecurity Center, and they're basically tracking the amounts of ransomware. So I think they've landed last year that there were sort of like fluctuations, but right now they've landed around averages of, I think it's like $200,000 US. But I think it's a really good point you're making that there is a lot of different scale to which companies are targeted, and the numbers of the ransom would be accurate for different sizes, different amounts. And it's also, I think what we're saying here is, and you're saying it really well, around like, okay, well, it's a very well thought out model, but I don't think that we always have the reliance of, okay, if you pay, this is what's going to happen. So it depends on what kind of ransomware provider you land with, and some of them might just not be trusted enough to actually, hold up their end of the bargain.
But if you think about it, if you're a ransomware provider, you don't want to get a reputation for not giving the data back, because then people are going to stop paying you. Right? You want to deliver good customer service. So you get a reputation that if you pay, the company's going to decide, do they want to pay or not? And this is hard, right? We in society want ransoms never to be paid. And if we all agree not to pay kidnappers don't have a good business model, they stop kidnapping people. But when it's your daughter, you want to make the exception, right? So we all want everyone not to pay, but when it's us, we want to pay. And that's a hard thing for society to deal with, where the group interest and self-interest diverge in that way.
Definitely, and I think you also want to be consistent and conscious about that decision, because like over time, priorities might shift, but you always want to be able to point to what made you decide to pay or not to pay, and to have some consistency and rules around that.
So what are the laws? I know in some countries it's illegal to pay a ransom. What is it in the EU?
I think in the EU it basically boils down to your decision, but typically the recommendation is for you to first notify the police or the cyber division before you actually make that decision. So you have to start by basically contacting them and working through it.
So is that a law or is that a recommendation?
I think, as far as I understand, it's more of a best practice.
Okay, we're not giving legal advice up here, just to make sure. Check with your attorneys.
Yeah,
right.
Definitely.
All right, so I had a question for you. Sorry, we're cutting you out.
No, go for it.
So I hear about what I call Ransomware 2.0, where now it's an enhancement. In original ransomware, I break into your network, I encrypt the data, and then ransom it back to you. In Ransomware 2.0, I break into your network, I steal the data, I encrypt it. Now I do two things. I charge you to get it back, and I threaten to release it if you don't pay. That directly hits privacy.
Yes.
How common is that?
Definitely, we've heard about these in privacy. I think they're emerging more and more. And one more thing to flag for me is it's not just like pure personal data. You also have the overlay of healthcare data, which has its own layer of notification obligations, especially in the US, but also in the EU, it's like a special layer of sensitivity. Financial data, again, additional layer of sensitivity. If there's critical infrastructure, well, we know how that one goes. Again, additional layer of notifications. You have to deal with different institutions. You need to tell them about the incident very, very quickly, typically before you actually pay out. So again, it's a similar scenario to the police thing. You have to already loop in the institutions as you're learning and figuring out what's happening. So definitely all of these things. And looking at EU and what they're drafting regarding EU data strategy, it seems like we might be also facing a situation where any kinds of data being involved in ransom will mean that you have to notify several institutions and work through it with them. So I think if you're thinking about it in terms of how do I prepare as a business, I think it's really critical to also think through the operational stuff, like who will be on the call with these people, with these institutions, while we're actually sorting through the problems? Who will be making sure that the communication is flowing well within the company as well as towards these institutions and towards our amazing ransomware service? So I think maybe this is just me tilting the discussion towards, okay, how do we prepare for it in as much as we can? But one of the pointers from my side would be definitely figure out who should be involved in dealing with these things and have a training on this. Things like tabletops can be really helpful just to give everybody who's supposed to be on that incident response team and ransomware response team an idea of what this might look like for them, so this is not their first time doing it in the middle of the panic.
Yeah. Just a quick one, because I also want to leave time for the audience to ask a few questions. So we've established what ransomware is, different types, it's being handled very professionally. It's a big problem, although we don't know the exact data behind it, but it's on the rise. Probably also because of the pandemic, more remote work, more vulnerabilities on that side. My next question is, who's actually behind these ransomware attacks? Are they just criminal organizations? Are they state affiliated? Are they actually states doing these attacks?
So it's mostly criminal, and Russia, Ukraine, Russia, Ukraine together in the before the war. Russia has basically they won't prosecute cyber criminals that don't attack targets in Russia. So that was a safe haven for ransomware. You did also see it out of Southeast Asia, Sub-Saharan Africa, South America, and so it's largely criminal gangs. There is some state-sponsored ransomware. North Korea famously did a bunch of financing of their government through ransomware and pushed state goals. That happens, it is the exception. Primarily it's a financial crime. And this is important. It means you're not a specific target, you're just in the blast radius. And if your security is better than the security of the networks down the hall, you're going to be safe. Right? The ransomware gangs will go after the easiest targets. So pretty decent cyber hygiene, and whether it's keeping your patches up to date, having good backups, kind of will largely inoculate you. Now, the exception is at the top, that there are gangs that will target particular companies, particular institutions, because they seem valuable. United States hospitals, UK also. Hospitals are hit, critical infrastructure, cities in the US, Atlanta and Baltimore.
Also entire governments like Costa Rica, I read.
Right, recently Costa Rica. Now, they don't even have an army, so,
Not much of a defense.
But yes, so Costa Rica's now in the news. So it's a big deal, and it's like moving global politics.
Yeah. But who's being targeted? Because you mentioned healthcare companies seem to be a big target.
I mean, a lot of it's just shot out at all of you, and I'll get 10 victims, I don't care who they are.
So it's not necessarily public institutions or individuals or big companies, it's everyone, right? Is that also what you see at OneTrust?
Yeah, definitely. That's kind of what we're seeing as well. So it could be different approaches for larger companies or countries, but it's definitely the case where you have smaller actors targeting SMEs and smaller businesses. It's just slightly different mechanism of it, yeah.
I already talked a little bit how you can sort of prevent these attacks or mitigate. What is the single best advice you can give an SME in particular, actually? Or startups?
Yeah, I think definitely don't try to, avoid it and bury your head in the sand just because you don't have large enough budget to do everything perfectly to prepare. I think even as you spoke about it, some of the basic things, thinking about operationally, who is our team to cover this? How do we make sure we capture our decision-making process? Do we have a playbook to address this? Technically, let's talk about some security items like the obvious, backups.
Patches,
yes.
Backups, good firewall.
Yeah.
Maybe this is the basic stuff.
Just like giving yourself the time to think through how this would run and try to identify some of the biggest gaping holes and think through how do we down the line mitigate for them is much, much better than avoiding the topic altogether.
I think we had a ransomware attack on our countdown clock, but I'm guessing we have about 10 minutes left.
The next infinity minutes.
So So we'll have about 10 minutes, I think. So if anyone from the audience has a question, the young lady over there is going to run over to you and.
All right, and while you're thinking, I'm going to talk about something that is new. It's actually a new business model for cybercrime, which is on the rise. It's not ransomware, but it's business email compromise. And that's where I break into your network or otherwise pretend to be your CEO, send an email to someone in accounting and say, please wire this money to this account. Yep. It's important. And this seems to be the new criminal business model on the rise.
Hi, good morning, guys. Thanks for a very interesting talk. Luke's my name. I'm actually a medical doctor. As you might have heard, there was a massive ransomware attack against our national healthcare system last year.
Yeah.
And just interestingly, as you said, it kind of runs as a business, but it was the government that made a decision not to pay the ransom, and then obviously some people's data was released on the dark web. I was just wondering, how do you feel, should the patients or the end users in any industry have the right to say whether the ransom should be paid, or should it just be the data manager who's made the failure in the first place? I know it's probably a bit of an impossible question.
You know, I want it to be public policy. I mean, we as a group have to decide whether to pay. Problem with paying is you incent the business model, right? It becomes profitable, and it becomes more profitable. So we don't, you know, in the United States, Atlanta and Baltimore were two interesting case studies, because I forget which one of them paid, one of them didn't. I'm forgetting which one paid and didn't. The one who paid actually got off cheaper. It was more expensive to recover the data without paying. Yet, that is more morally proper. So now we have to decide as a group. I don't think it's the network holder. I don't think it's the data owners. I think we as society have to decide. I want the EU to pass some law that says, you know, either don't pay, or you can pay under these circumstances, or whatever the rules are. Let's all figure them out together, and then we all follow them. So that's what I want, rather than like the data owners get to vote, which seems a bit weird.
I don't know, I agree that it's maybe hard to orchestrate that kind of collective decision-making, but the rules should be in place ahead of time, as you say, and I would say it should be easy to facilitate liability of the state towards the people who have been impacted to actually claim damages. So that would be my focus, making it easy for people to actually claim damages for the impact that it has on them.
By the way, is Europe playing a leading role here in like implementing those rules, or at least thinking about it?
No, but
we clear answer.
But we are members of think tanks which are talking to the governments who are putting this forward. And you don't have to look too far, because like the GDPR, it does provide for almost like class action type of service where the individuals can actually claim damages, and there is liability for the controllers under the GDPR for the data breached. So there are mechanisms for it. It's just not as common in Europe as you would think, because, I don't know, US is very litigative, but in Europe we're all sitting pretty somehow.
Thank you very much. That sounds like a very practical strategy.
Thank you. We have another hand up here.
There's a hand up there.
Please introduce yourself as well before you ask a question. It's always nice.
Thanks. My name is Michael Bennett. I work for International Airlines Group. I'm just really interested in this topic. You mentioned, Bruce, I think earlier on, about the new tactics, about, you know, they break into the network, they encrypt the data, and then they look to get paid, but then they're just threatening to release it. What if you have like a really good backup system, and then they just say that they're going to release it anyway? So you have access to your data, technically it's all backed up, but then you don't, it's like healthcare data, for example, you don't want it to be released. How can companies get around that risk?
So they kind of can't, right? I mean, so this is, so it's not uncommon to, you know, if you have a bad network security, you get ransomed, you pay the ransom, then you get ransomed again the next week because you didn't fix the problem. So that's not uncommon. You're right, a gang could charge you the ransom, you pay the ransom, they release your data anyway. But they're not going to want to, right? They want to provide good customer service. You paid, they want to be in the news as, right, people paid the big ransom and the criminals made good on their promises. Because that way the next victim will pay also. So we tend not to see examples of the data being released, even though the victim pays. Because you can put the data on the dark web, but it's not that valuable. And that's risky. I mean, right, if you watch TV, the risky part of any kidnapping is the ransom payoff, right? That's where the kidnapper and the victim have to come together and transfer money. That's the risky part. And this is where cryptocurrency makes ransomware on the internet easy. Because now you can do that anonymously via email. Now, it's not as anonymous as people think. Right? You know, Bitcoin, the fact that Bitcoin's anonymous is kind of a myth. The fact that it's centralized, there's a lot of myths about it. And so the Colonial Pipeline payment was like $5 million American dollars. Most of that was recovered. But the FBI was able to recover most of that ransom payment, even though it was Bitcoin. So there's a lot of moving parts right now, but there really isn't a way. You know, and this is why they were trying to release it. It's medical data, it's personal data. There are regulatory issues, especially in the EU. Now, the US is kind of more messier. So that threat is often a bigger incentive than the release it, because the company will have good backups or something.
Linda, anything to add to that?
No, totally agree.
Do we have another question? Over there?
Hi there. My name is... Hello. Yeah, my name is Lou Anderson. I'm working for Microsoft, and I work a lot with independent software vendors, and they've been playing quite a large role as a door opener for these ransomware attacks to actually get into organizations. Could you elaborate a little bit more on the ISV's roles in ransomware attacks, and also how companies can protect themselves through supplier code of conduct towards those ISVs, for example?
Linda, do you want to tackle that one?
I'm not sure if I heard the question.
Yeah, it's a
fully.
bit tricky.
The acoustics in this room is pretty mediocre. I think you're asking about ransomware gangs getting your network via partners. So yes.
Yes, I see you nodding.
So,
I don't know. I mean, this is a problem with security since the beginning. I mean, it's not just ransomware. You have a network, and you tend to open your network for various reasons, for people working at home, for partners who can get in, and now suddenly your security depends on their security.
Yeah.
United States, very famously, over a decade ago, Target Corporation, big American retailer, dumb name, by the way, do not call yourself Target, that's so stupid. They had their payments networks breached because they had an HVAC contractor in Pennsylvania that had bad cybersecurity, and that's how the criminal got in.
yeah.
A few years ago, we learned about a Las Vegas casino that was hacked through, and I wish I was making this up, but I'm not, their internet-connected fish tank. So yes, that is a problem.
And yeah, I think, like, honestly, there is no perfect way of preventing it, but if the businesses are already handling some sort of vendor review process during procurement, it makes a lot of sense to be digging into the ransomware-specific security questions ahead of time and do a little bit of tracking and following up, especially where you know that the vendor potentially has broader access, fewer user controls, or the data they're handling or accessing is more sensitive. So I know we all have limited bandwidth, but if you can zone in and focus a little bit more on those vendors where the risk is higher, let's prioritize those. I know it's not anything super revolutionary, but this is what helps with the prevention.
Okay. Our countdown clock just came back for a set 3 minutes ago.
Right.
And actually, I have a quick question, if you don't mind, because ransomware is very closely tied with cryptocurrency, as you pointed out. The fact that we now have crypto crash, crypto winter, whatever you want to call it, is that good news or is it bad news?
I don't think it matters. I mean, as long as there's a way, I mean, cryptocurrencies are inherently speculative. I mean, they do not work unless there are speculators. Because everybody who's mining cryptocurrencies, they need to convert what they get to cash, right, to pay electricity bills. Cryptocurrency is useless as it is. You need to convert it to actual fiat currency. So as long as there is a market, regardless of the value, there's going to be a way for criminals to monetize the crimes. And this actually speaks to a way governments can enforce. Because if you think about it, no one uses Bitcoin for anything useful. Right? Everybody's speculating. That's all it's being used for. The only people who are net sellers of cryptocurrency, the only, are either the miners or the criminals. That's it. Nobody, so that is a way to detect ransomware gangs. You look for the big sellers of cryptocurrency, and those are your criminals.
Yeah, as always, follow the money, I guess. Anything to add?
Yeah, no, agree totally. And I was thinking like the miners, the criminals, and Tesla somehow, right? Interesting company. Yeah, nothing to add.
All right, so we still have 2 minutes to go. Do we have another question from the audience?
I see one there, and I see one there.
I don't know where. The lady with the
microphone somewhere, we have no idea.
Yeah.
So we should end. Okay.
All right, they don't want us to answer your questions. But if you come over there, we'll answer them later.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're very approachable, so please, if you have another question, just come backstage. I think we have a break coming up, so thank you for joining us. Thank you, of course, for joining the panel as well. And have a nice rest of the day. Cheers.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thanks.